Hello, hello, hello. How we doing? I don't know if anyone watched the video from last night, but I've basically gone to sleep and woken back up and ready to have another quick session. A little bit late, but that's okay. Alright, so we didn't have a lot of luck with critical reasoning last night, but I'm going to try a couple more questions just to see if it can go any better. So I'll just open it up and I'll start the clock. Let's go. Hey, I'm having a terrible run of this. Alright, let's step through it quick. So, each of the following provides support for the prediction, except. So, something's predicted in this argument, and all of these, like one of these, will not help the prediction. That's essentially what that says. So, energy core sales increased in Osamia. The CFO explained that because of the country next to it, Kakua, industrializing, that's what led to the increase. So the prediction, so this is the thing I need to not support with one of the answers. The prediction is that trade made possible by industrialization will grow between Kakua and Osamia, and that will lead to further increases in energy core sales in the region. So basically 4 of these will support it, and then the other one is the answer. So we'll support this prediction that trade made possible by industrialization will grow between those two countries. So A, although non-Assamian countries have military and trade presence in Assamia, their oil sales last year in the region were not significantly above normal levels. See, I read that and I remember thinking that doesn't help, but then I forgot because I didn't use my scratch pad to keep track of it, that okay, I read it, it's still in, I needed to do that. So I need to remember to use my pad. Mines accessing Kikua's rich natural resources were put into operation for the first time last year. So that doesn't hurt it. I don't think that really directly helps the fact that we're talking about trade made possible by industrialization. That's the thing that's causing the increase in sales. And so, oh, right, no, sorry. No, that does make sense because Kikua is the neighbor country. So if they've got mines and they're industrializing, then that means that we'll be able to kind of deal with them more, right? So yeah, that supports it. So that's out, which is what I did. Each of the Assamian countries currently have few restrictions in place on the business that can be done with its neighboring countries. That supports it. Trading with Assamia is easy, so that supports the idea that industrialization will help it grow. Energy Corp's primary competitors had a tanker accident early last year that caused environmental damage in Assamia and damaged the company's standing in the area. So I said this did not support the prediction because the prediction is that it's this trade made possible by industrialization will grow between the two countries, and that's what will cause an increase in sales. This is saying there's D is saying there's a different reason for the increase in sales. This is saying that because a competitor had an accident, we'll get an increase in sales. And so that's not what the CFO predicted. The CFO predicted that this increase in sales would come from trade increasing between the two countries. So that's why I ended up picking this. But let's just say that that's not exactly ruling it out, because it does support the idea that trade will grow, as in sales will grow. So if it supports the idea that sales will grow, I mean, let's say that that's the actual prediction. If we're going to be very specific and say leading to further increases in sales, that's the entire prediction. Now, see, I think that's wrong, because if we apply our sentence correction skills to this sentence, right, he predicts, that is clearly the predicate. Well, no, that's the subject and the predicate. So the prediction is trade made possible by industrialization will grow between these two countries. That's the sentence. That's the prediction. This is a modifier. This is saying, this is explaining what that means. So that increase in trade would then lead to sales. But it's just modifying the main prediction, which was that industrialization will grow trade will grow between these two countries. So what our competitors are doing doesn't affect whether or not trade is going to help increase our sales. It only affects how many sales we take away from them, from the competitors, that is. So I still think that's wrong just based on reading this sentence. But anyway, let's go to E. One of Assamia's neighbors, a developing nation, has a growing population with a reasonable amount of disposable wealth. Yep, so that supports the idea as well, because if Kikua is growing, is industrializing and then trading more with the countries around it, having another country that has money to spend will support the idea that it can do business with Kikua. So that one supports it, so that one's out. And just to recap quickly, so mines accessing the resources at Kikua were put into operation, so that supports the idea that they're going to keep trading with Kikua. And C, each of the Assamian countries currently have few restrictions, making it easy to work with them. Yep, cool. That supports the idea as well. So B, C, and E very easily removed. So let's say that we came to A and D, and now I'm deciding. I kept them in, and I'm deciding. Non-Assamian countries have a military and trade presence in Assamia. Their oil sales last year in the region were not significantly above normal levels. Okay, well, just reading that again just one time. So again, the prediction is that Kukua and the countries around Assamia will increase trade. So the fact that these other countries around Assamia didn't increase their sales of oil specifically, well, I guess in the region they're saying it's the whole area, it's not just Assamia. Okay, yeah, so that does not support it. That's fair. Let's go back to D again. One of Energy Corp's primary competitors had a tanker accident early last year. It caused environmental damage. This does nothing to support the idea that Kukua will do business with Assamia's neighbors. This doesn't support that idea at all. So, but I guess it's one of those things. Now, if we're looking at it between these two, these other countries didn't increase their oil sales, which means they probably didn't increase them with Kukua, which kind of covers both sides, because then the trade didn't increase, which also wouldn't have helped increase the sales. Whereas this has nothing to do with the trade increasing, but it could affect the second part, which is energy core sales. So if energy core sales go up because of this, then it does support that, just this part, which is not technically the prediction, but it still makes it better than this, I suppose. So that's probably why it's A. So it's two bad options. Well, two reasonable options, just one slightly closer, I suppose. Let's just see quickly what they said. Causal argument and a prediction. Strengthen or weaken the prediction using the most common error of causation. Introducing a new real cause. So the most common error of causation is giving it a different reason. Okay, so the question is whether X really causes Y, where X is industrialization in the country and Y is an increase in oil sales. So does industrialization cause oil sales? Oh, I see that. And if you think of it sort of more specifically in those terms, and that's sort of saying, yeah, that industrialization was happening in Kukua, but oil sales didn't go up with these other countries. So it's got to be, so that kind of says, well, it increased sales with energy core, but not necessarily in general. So that's why. Yeah, okay. So it doesn't even concern the relevant countries, so it's not a strengthener and maybe the correct answer. Well, it does concern the relevant countries. Non-Assamian countries. Yeah, non-Assamian countries. I misunderstood something very key to this question. Assamia is not a country. It's the name of the region. I understood Assamia to be a country and Kukua is its neighbor. Assamia is the entire region. Kukua is one of the countries in it. Jeez, that changes everything. So now it's obvious that A is wrong because non-Assamian countries have nothing to do with the prediction. Kukua and its Assamian neighbors, that makes more sense too, because yeah, that makes more sense that it's its neighbors within the same region. Yeah, all right. And in that case, well, D is still, Yeah, D is still not relevant to necessarily saying that industrialization causes it, but it still talks to Energy Core and their sales. So for the same reason, it's weaker than this, but this has literally nothing to do with anything in the argument. So that's why it's the weakest. So, well, sorry, weakest in terms of not strengthening, not supporting the prediction. Yeah. Sounds like an industrialization, which would make it a mild strengthener as the cause of oil sales, and hence not the answer. Mild strengthener, few restrictions will allow oil sales to grow freely. Yep. Choice D is a strengthener because it will help establish that Energy Core and not its competitors will be able to reap benefits. See, again, they've already articulated the prediction is industrialization increasing oil sales, i.e. increasing trade. It's not specifically Energy Core sales. It's just oil sales in general. But anyway, yeah. Choice C is a mild strengthener because it suggests there is a buyer of the oil. Yep, that makes sense too. All right, so I mean, I ruled out 3 out of the 5 correctly, even though I misunderstood the prompt. I misunderstood the argument, but it goes to show that paying a little bit more attention helps. All right, we have a new question on the screen. I'll restart the clock. Let's go. All right, finally got one. Nice. All right. So I didn't use my scratch pad again until the end, but I should have been crossing A, C, and E as I went. All right. My logic. The conclusion above depends on which of the following assumptions. So I want something that makes this the only thing possible. Sorry, yeah, something that this relies on to make it true without actually having said it. So I just read it sort of line by line, making sure I understood what each thing was. So study found that 21% of citizens of Patria had prepared their taxes with the assistance of a tax accountant. So 21% of those that were selected randomly had an accountant do their taxes. Among those whose audits uncovered indications of tax fraud, only 3% of them had prepared their taxes with a tax accountant. So basically, out of everyone that they audited, 97% of them had done their audits themselves. Sorry, done their tax returns themselves. So clearly, citizens of Patria who prepare their taxes without the assistance of a tax accountant are more likely to commit tax fraud. So to me, the first assumption that sort of jumped out in my mind was something along the lines of, well, one, the audits uncovered indications of potential tax fraud. It's not talking about people who they investigated and found fraud. It's people who they uncovered some indications of it. So with that in mind, they're assuming then that if there are indications, then there is fraud. Like, just because there are indications, there are some red flags that they get prompted for, doesn't mean that fraud happened. And so to say that, yeah, clearly because of this, the people who don't use accountants must be committing more fraud, are more likely to commit fraud, you're assuming then that those indications translate to an actual higher level of fraud. So that's like a big assumption right there that kind of jumped out to me immediately. The other thing was something kind of along the lines of like there could have been some sort of assumption based around the fact that this is just a sample. So obviously they didn't audit every single citizen of Patria. They audited just a group of people. And so there could have been some assumption there around something like that the sample that they chose was an accurate reflection of the full citizenship of Patria, because depending on how they do their sampling, like they could have done it well or poorly, but depending on how they did their sampling, it's possible that they just picked a sample that happened to be the few people, like it happened to just be people who committed fraud without going to an accountant, and they just missed every person who went to an accountant and committed fraud. So I'm not saying that's likely, but it's possible, right? And so it all comes down to how they chose their sample. And so it's not as clear an assumption, but there could have been one there around the sampling being a true reflection of the country. That could have been an assumption that they might mention as well, I thought. So those were the two that came to mind. So when I looked at the answers, I did end up staring at the last ones a bit, but A, citizens who commit tax fraud with the assistance of an accountant are less likely to be caught by an audit. I don't think it's assuming that. I mean, they're not saying anything about whether or not people get away with it. They're just saying that people who don't use an accountant are doing it more. So it's actually kind of the opposite of what this is saying. This isn't saying that people with accountants are doing it less. It's saying that they're doing it just as much, but not getting caught. And that's not what this says at all. So that was out, and I should have put a cross on it immediately. I ruled it out, but I didn't cross on my pad. B, citizens whose records have indications of potential tax fraud are more likely to commit tax fraud than those whose records do not. So that's not quite exactly what I said, because I was talking about the fact that, okay, well, I mean, it is pretty much actually almost exactly what I said. I was basically saying that, yeah, if you find these indications, that means it's going to be higher levels of fraud. And that's pretty much what B is saying, actually. So I kept that in. Like that. C, tax accountants will ensure that their clients file taxes that are not fraudulent. I don't think it's assuming that. It's kind of maybe inferring that, but it's not assuming it. And so to clarify what I mean by that, it's looking at the data saying that 97% of the people who committed fraud did it on their own. Only 3%, indications of fraud. So only 3% of those with indications used an accountant. And they're saying because of that, it looks like mostly the fraud is happening with whatever. But they didn't really say anything about the fact that the accountants are doing anything to make them more honest. So, and they don't really need to assume that, to think that 97% of those with indicators mean that's the case. So it has nothing to do with the accountants themselves. So yeah, C was out, and I crossed that out as well. D, some citizens who choose to prepare their taxes without the assistance of an accountant, typos here, do so in order to conceal tax fraud. This, I think I kept it in just because I didn't quite understand it properly. I'm understanding it now on that read, but I didn't quite, like, I think the typo and things like that made it a little bit weirder to read. But some citizens who choose to prepare their own taxes do so in order to conceal fraud. Like, they've said that they think people who prepare their own taxes are more likely to do fraud. Now, this is kind of making almost another conclusion from that. So we're saying, okay, if they're more likely to prepare their own taxes, if those that prepare their own taxes are more likely to commit fraud, then we can also conclude that they might be doing their taxes on their own to try to conceal that fraud. But that follows from this conclusion. It doesn't follow from the earlier premises, because the earlier premises was basically just that those that had indications of fraud tended to not have an accountant. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, it doesn't say anything about their motivation. It's just saying that that happened. So, and we are talking about an assumption, but we don't need to assume their motivation to make the statement that they're doing it. We don't need to know their motivation. We just need to assume, we just need to know they're doing it. So I think that's why D is out, actually. And so if I understood that better, I could have ruled that out sooner. But I ended up, when I was staring at it, I was staring at B and D, trying to understand D to see if it might also be a good answer. But yeah, without the assistance of an account, do so in order to conceal fraud. Anyway, and then E, citizens who prepare their taxes with the assistance of an accountant do so in order to avoid accidentally committing tax fraud. Again, we don't know anything about motivations, and there's no reason to assume anything about motivations. We're making an assumption about whether or not they actually did it, not whether or not they had reasons to, or what they did to try to avoid it or anything like that. So I think that's that one was out as well. And so having gone through that now, clearly it becomes B. And I ended up choosing B just on the basis that I couldn't convince myself this made sense. And I knew that B seemed like a good answer, so I went with it. But yeah, on the reread, having worked through their poor language there, it makes more sense to me now. So just looking at their explanation really quickly. An argument to pick apart. Term matching is a good candidate for any argument, but especially pseudo-syllogistic arguments such as this one. I need to find out exactly what pseudo-syllogistic means. So we can create our filter by looking for a mismatch of terms. So evidence in study roughly equals in general. So a study this year found something. I don't know where they're matching in general to, but anyway. Citizens of Patria whose tax reports were selected at random for an audit roughly matches citizens of Patria. So that was one thing I mentioned earlier, right? That they're kind of assuming that those selected in the audit do reflect what the actual full citizenship represents. So, so this second one was the second kind of potential assumption I picked up. Preparing taxes with or without an accountant equals preparing taxes with or without an accountant. All right, so that's just comparing this to this. Yep. And indications of potential tax fraud does not equal more likely to commit tax fraud. Yeah, so that's the thing, that's the big jump. Right, so in the prepare their taxes without the assistance of an accountant, yep. And then more likely to commit fraud versus indications of potential fraud. So out of these 4 things that they've written, these were the 2 assumptions that I picked up. That indications equals, like they assumed that indications mean more likely. They also assumed that the sample size represents the full country. So I kind of did this again. I did the same sort of process of going, well, what's translating from the evidence to the conclusion, and what's kind of a gap that needs an assumption to bridge it. And yeah, those were the 2. So yeah, I picked up on the same things, which is good. I just didn't call it a pseudo-syllogistic argument when I did it. Creating a filter. The first 2 rows highlight the same basic point, and that is, if the study has been conducted in a way that is not representative of the population of Patriot as a whole, then the audit would be questionable. Yeah, right. That's what I said, right? That if the study doesn't reflect the whole country, then anything it's found wouldn't necessarily mean anything. However, we've been told that the citizens selected for the audit were selected at random, so they're most likely representative of the population. Sure, yeah. Sure, I mean, yeah, that's fair, somewhat. But how did you do it at random? Like, that's another question. But anyway, so they're most likely representative of the population. Most basic mismatch is the final one, determine the conclusion, more likely to commit tax fraud. And that is actually what I said was the biggest, like the most likely assumption as well. It matches up imprecisely with the concept in the evidence indications of tax fraud. So for example, maybe it's typical to demonstrate indications of tax fraud and not actually commit fraud. Maybe the indications are poor predictors, actually committing the tax fraud more. So we look for an answer choice that expresses this connection, find B. We can use the negation test to see whether B is critical to the argument. What if citizens whose records have indications of potential tax fraud are not at all more likely to commit tax fraud? Indeed, the argument collapses. Higher incidence of these indications then would not constitute evidence of a higher rate of tax fraud in any group. Yeah, the negation test is pretty handy sometimes to confirm an answer, I think. Yeah. All right, well, that's a good one. Let's do one more critical reasoning. All right, let's go. All right, got another one, and that one felt easy. Thankfully, I finally got one that just made sense. So, okay, let's run through it. So, which of the following, if true, best accounts? I should find out. I need to confirm if on the exam you're able to actually highlight text with the mouse like this. Like, I know you can't obviously write on the screen or anything, but anyway, which of the following are true best accounts for the new cafe's approach to conducting tests with potential customers. So best accounts for their approach. It's another way of saying one of these answers explains why they did some test the way that they did it. I translated that in my mind to say, okay, what is this asking for? One of these explains why they did the test the way that they did. I don't know what test they did yet, but I know that I need to find an explanation for why they did it that way. So we look at it. A new cafe. They want to open and offer some weird beverages in a weird atmosphere. And so before they started building it, they had funding already. They had funding already, and that funding was based on how good their beverages were. But when it came to doing tests to gauge the interest of potential customers, they didn't ask whether or not they liked the beverages. They wanted to just know about the atmosphere. So basically, their approach was, with investors, they just gave them how good their drinks were, and with the customers, they didn't ask about the drinks at all, really, or they didn't focus on it at all. They only really cared about the atmosphere. And I think, rightly or wrongly, I did zero in on how they dealt with the customers, because it seemed like it was almost being highlighted. The way it's like, but when, it's sort of saying like, oh, but here's some contradiction. Here's a thing that's like, well, this is what they did with the customers. And we almost need to kind of explain like, well, why, right? Like, why did they not just give customers drinks too? If they're a cafe, why wouldn't you ask them about your drinks? So it seemed to me that this was the part that was weird, that was going to be kind of in dispute almost. So, but in theory, it could also have been, well, why did they only give drinks to the investors and not give them anything about the atmosphere? So yeah, I didn't really think about the investor part at all, if I'm honest. But it's also possible that it could have been something explaining why investors don't care about the atmosphere as much. So anyway, investors are unlikely to invest substantial amounts of capital in a cafe whose own managers are skeptical about the commercial prospects of the beverages they are selling. Oh, scratch everything I just said for the last 10 seconds. Conducting tests with potential customers. That's why I zeroed in on it. I had forgotten after answering, but that is why I zeroed in on the customer side, because the question specifically said, why did they do it this way with the customers? That's why. And so yeah, investors are unlikely to invest, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. We don't care about the investors. We're only looking at customers. And I did do that. I just didn't remember when I was going through it at the end. The potential customers are not likely to be able to envision how initial designs of the cafe and later designs of the atmosphere might differ. Well, that would be a reason not to ask them about the atmosphere. That's not a reason to focus on the atmosphere with them. So that's out. If a new cafe succeeds, the commercial benefits will accrue largely to the investors, not to the patrons of the cafe. Where the money goes doesn't matter at all with what we ask customers, potential customers. So again, out. After opening its first location, the cafe will easily be able to make adjustments to the beverages, but it will not be able to make adjustments to the location's unusual atmosphere. That's a really good reason to try to get the atmosphere tight, because at the end of the day, you want the atmosphere to be cool for your customers. You want your customers to be drawn to the atmosphere. Whether or not your investors like your atmosphere doesn't matter. The money's there and you've built it now. So to draw the customers, they're the ones that you want to like the place. And so if you can't change it once it's built, and if they don't like it, then all of that money is wasted. So that looked like a really good answer. I kept it. And potential customers are unlikely to be able to predict which of the beverages at the cafe will be the most popular. I mean, if this is true, and we always kind of assume that every answer is true, so if we assume this is true, that they won't be able to predict what drinks will be popular, I mean, yes, that is a reason to not ask about the beverages, because if they can't predict what's going to be popular, then why are we asking about them at all? But I think there's kind of two parts to why I didn't really keep this in, because I was pretty quick to come back to D straight away. And I think there's two parts to why. The first part is it says most popular, and that word kind of zeroes in this response to be, of all the options, what's most and least popular. That doesn't mean that it's all completely unpopular. It's not saying that no one's coming and buying and like there are zero sales. It's saying that even if there was billions of dollars in sales, we don't know which one product would be the highest selling, because they can't predict what is most popular. If this said potential customers are unlikely to be able to predict if the beverages will be popular, then that is a bigger, more important statement for the cafe, because that's saying, well, they have no idea if this will even be something that is like worthwhile to pursue, in which case that becomes a much more important thing. But that just the order of popularity is not that important. And so that was the big one. That's the reason I was like, that's not as good. And I think the other part of it was just it's which of the beverages at the cafe will be the most popular? Yeah, I think at the end of the day, even if that we take it as being, well, they won't be able to predict how popular the products are, the fact that you can still make adjustments to the product once you've opened still makes that less important in my mind than D, where you can't change the atmosphere, or they're saying that you can't. So I think that's the thing. Like, and remember, like I said, every answer is considered true. So even if you're not choosing D, that statement is still considered to be true. So even if we think E is the most important, like the popularity of the beverages is the number one thing, that's why they did it that way, it's still also true that you can't quickly make changes, or you can't make changes at all, as they said, to the atmosphere. And so based on that, I was like, okay, yeah, even if the drinks aren't popular, because we can change them, that's less important. So D would be the main reason why they focused on atmosphere. So those were the two sort of parts to it. I didn't articulate it in my mind as much as I just said out loud, but that's kind of what went through my mind quickly. And it's just D just stayed as the strongest answer by far. So, and let's just see what they said. Cafe's approach to potential customers testing. Yep. So the issue is why they tested the atmosphere, not the beverages. Yep. Evidently, 1, the beverage does not need testing, and 2, the atmosphere needs testing. Okay, I mean, that's just like repeating it at this point, but if that helps someone kind of make it clear in their mind, then fair enough. An explanation will touch on both points, okay? And definitely the atmosphere needs testing more than the beverages do. That would be the ideal. So a comparison of atmosphere and beverages establishing that atmosphere is more in need of testing. We can use that as our filter. And that just repeated the same thing 3 times in one paragraph, but okay. Applying the filter. Choice A doesn't involve a comparison of beverage and atmosphere, so we hold it in contempt. Choice A was the one about investors. Yeah, who cares? Choice B is awkwardly phrased, comparing a cafe with its atmosphere, but it doesn't compare directly or indirectly with the beverages. Yeah, yeah, sure. C is quite immaterial to the comparison. Where it goes to, exactly where the money goes doesn't matter at all to the comparison, so that's out. Yep. D is brilliant, which is more or less my reaction to it as well. because it actually compares the beverages and the atmosphere. Yep. So D is in. And E does not involve a comparison. E is also nonsensical because customers don't have to make this prediction. The cafe owners are doing the gauging per the prompt. Per the prompt. When it conducted intensive tests to gauge the interest of customers. Right, okay. That's an interesting part that I didn't even pick up on. The customer doesn't have to predict how popular it's going to be. They just have to say how much they like it. And it's the owner, I think, that is judging how popular it's going to be, which is a good point. I didn't even pick up on that. I think mine is still relevant, but yeah, I didn't pick up on that. All right, cool. I'm going to do one, as has been the theme in the last couple of sessions, I'm going to do one problem-solving question, just so I'm doing something on both sides. All right, question is on the screen, almost. All right, the whole question is now on the screen. All right, last question for the morning session. I'll be back tonight, I think. And let's go. Okay. I haven't looked at combinations in a little while, so I'm a little rusty. So it's 4 options. I have a total of 25. I mean, that took longer than it probably should have because it was actually pretty easy. And in my mind, I was like, do I need to do combinations? And I probably wasted 10, 15 seconds grappling with that in my head. But no, there was no need for combinations on this question. It was too straightforward for that. So this is like a 500 level question probably. So they gave us 2 sets, 2, 3, 4, 6. First thing I noticed about it was that the sets were identical, same digits, and that they were not consecutive, so there was a gap, there was 5 missing. Those were 2 things that jumped out at me. Maybe I could have written them down, and maybe like good scratchpad technique would have been, notice that, okay, 2, 3, 4, 6, write down the set themselves, say non-consec, and you know, yeah, something like that. Maybe I could have said something like that, I don't know. In the end, it didn't seem like a lot of information to try and keep track of. And it looked as well like the question's not that long, so there can't be that much information for me to keep track of. Anyway, two integers will be randomly selected from the sets above, one from S and one from T. Cool. So I'm going to pick one of those, one of those. What is the probability that the product of the two will equal 12? So yeah, I started thinking about, well, okay, do I need to do some combinations or something like that, like combinations with replacement or something like that. And then I realized, no, this is much simpler than that. What are the factors of 12? Other than 1 and 12? So 2, 6, 3, 4. So these are the factors, but they'll only ever equal 12 when they pair up in those pairs. So from S we pick 2, then from T we need 6. From S we pick 6, then from 2 we need 2. From T we need 2. If from S we pick 3, then from T we need 4. And if we pick 4 from S, then we need 3 from T. So 4 scenarios where the product equals 12. How many possible combinations are there altogether? Yeah, exactly. How you going, Abhishek? Nice to see you. Yeah, so that one's an easy one. It's 4 out of 16 possible options equals 1 over 4.25. So that one was nice and easy. Good to see you. I was actually just about to jump off, but if you've joined, I can go for a little bit longer, and maybe go back to you wanted to do some verbal, right? Were you thinking critical reasoning? I've just done a few. All right, I'm going to do one critical reasoning question while I wait for your response. But if I don't hear from you, then I think, yeah, I will. I'll wrap up soon. So we've got the question on screen, and I'm starting the clock now. Let's go. Hmm. All right. Took a bit of a long time and apparently still got it wrong. All right. Let's have a look. Yep, no worries, Abhishek. I'll start going through this question. So I'm just going to turn my fan on really quick. So, geez, why is my phone doing this? Okay. Oops. No one wants to read my emails, do they? Okay, there we go. All right. So, which of the following are true undermines the argument? So, we're trying to weaken the argument. So, reading through it, the number of stories aired about conflicts in Africa was lower last year than it had been previously. So, the number of stories has gone down about conflict in Africa, in our nation, whatever that is. Many armed conflicts have been fully or partly resolved with ceasefire agreements, and others have lessened intensity due to the fatigue of combating forces. Okay, so there are fewer conflicts, and some of them are just less intense. So it is probable that the low number of articles is due to a decline in armed conflict in Africa. Okay, so basically there are fewer articles because there are fewer conflicts. That is essentially the conclusion that the analyst made. And so we want something that's saying, well, no, there's a different reason that there are fewer articles. It's not about, yeah, E is actually a really good answer. Anyway, it's not about the fact that there are fewer conflicts occurring. So yeah, going through it, A, every story about armed conflict in Africa that was submitted last year was aired, has nothing to do with why not there are fewer now. So that's out. The time it takes to research and write a report on armed conflict has declined. So that's saying it's now easier to write reports around conflict. So if it's easier, then that would be a reason that there would be more. So yeah, that would be a reason that there would be more articles about it. So the fact that there are fewer is still an explanation for why there aren't more articles. So that's not countering the analyst's conclusion. So that's out as well. Hence the A and B being ruled out. So those two are easy to rule out. The number of total stories aired in the nation was the same last year as in previous years. I didn't rule this out immediately just because I wanted to give myself room to think about it. But my first thought is that doesn't say anything about specifically articles about conflicts. I mean, maybe at a stretch you could say, well, if the number of articles themselves is stable, but the number of articles about the conflicts has gone down, then yeah, it's still consistent with fewer conflicts equaling fewer articles. So I could have ruled that one out actually. D, which is what I chose incorrectly, a single armed conflict can easily lead to newsworthy developments, justifying a large number of stories aired on television. Now, this looked appealing to me because it seemed to be saying that even if there were fewer conflicts, there should still be just as many articles, because a single conflict can easily lead to a large number of stories. So So that seemed to sort of imply to me that just because there are fewer doesn't explain the reduction, because there should still be plenty of stories. But I suppose even saying that out loud now, I'm realizing, well, just because there's a lot doesn't mean that it's the same number. It could still be fewer. So the number of articles could still be smaller, which is why that should probably be ruled out. And I didn't really realize it until I said it out loud. Which brings me to E. Just prior to last year, several major news shows revised certain prohibitions against airing stories about armed conflict in Africa. And this did look appealing. And as you can see, I did not rule it out immediately. So I just was ending up choosing between D and E. And in the end, because I didn't think through D properly, I sort of kind of guessed between those two and said D. But yeah, on reflection, it's clearly E, because if there are prohibitions on airing stories about armed conflict, then that would be a very clear explanation for why there might be fewer stories, because some of the stories that were being aired or printed before are now prohibited. So how many conflicts there were would have nothing to do with whether or not you're actually even allowed to report on them at all. So that is actually a really clear weakener of the analyst's argument. And so, yeah, I'm actually a little annoyed at myself for not catching that. But anyway, and we'll just confirm that everything I said is pretty consistent with what they explain. We can be pleased to see that we have what is essentially a causal argument. News coverage is down because armed conflicts have declined. Since we have a causal argument, we know that we can create a filter using the concept of another cause, which is probably what I should have had my focus on. I was less focused on could there be another cause, which would obviously be a good weakener. And I was more focused on, does this confirm the cause? And I probably shouldn't have been that focused on that. So that's a good lesson. Creating a filter, we can imagine another cause to explain the lower number of articles. For example, maybe something closer to our nation's hearts has been going on and has seized the stage, and that's the real reason coverage of Africa is down. We paraphrase what we're looking for as alternate cause of decreased coverage, and that makes sense, actually. A through C strengthen the argument. Yep, makes sense. I ruled them out too. C, I didn't do it as quickly, but I did in the end. D allows the causal relationship suggested to stand. It doesn't even bar the possibility that the news stations are out of articles. Yeah, okay. And E gives us what we're looking for, an alternative explanation. So negating E, what if news shows had not changed any policies about showing these stories? Then in that case, the policies would not be an explanation for the decrease in coverage. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, negating it strengthens the analyst's argument, so not negating it is a weakener. Yep, makes sense. Still with me, mate? I'm going to move on unless there's any reason I should stay on it. Yeah, it does. All right, let's do another one. I'll clear my scratch pad. All right. Let's go. Yeah, nice. So we both, oh, hang on. We both said E. They think C, which was the last one I ruled out. Okay. I'm curious why. I'm just going to step through my logic really quickly. So if we go through A, B, and D, because those were the easiest to rule out, I don't need to read the whole dialogue again. Basically, Rancher is saying that some regulation is going to cost them more money, and then that will hurt the economy. The regulator is saying, well, that money is going to go back into the economy in other businesses. So that is not demonstrating that the rancher's conclusion is based on evidence that's not relevant. It's not doing that. It's not addressing the rancher's evidence at all. Challenging the plausibility of the evidence that serves as the basis. Again, it's not addressing the evidence at all, so A and B were easy to rule out. And then D, reinforcing the rancher's conclusion by supplying a complementary interpretation of the evidence. No, it's not really reinterpreting the evidence at all, and it's not supporting them at all, really. So A, B, and D were easily removed. Now I ruled out C because after I came back to it, I kind of passed it and came back to it. But when I came back to it, I thought, okay, suggesting that the rancher's argument overlooks a mitigating consequence. Actually, the word consequence is probably the reason why I missed this. So when I came back to it and reread it, I was thinking, okay, the rancher's argument overlooks like a mitigating factor. That's what I read. I didn't properly read the word consequence. I read it as it overlooks a mitigating factor, i.e., the rancher is saying that the impact on the ranch on ranchers will hurt the economy, and then I thought this was saying, well, no, it won't hurt the economy because here's this other thing you didn't think about. But mitigating consequence is not a mitigating factor. It's not saying that, no, the thing you said won't happen because. It's saying, even if the thing you think will happen does happen, there's another thing that will result, which kind of mitigates the problem, and you're overlooking that. And that actually does describe this argument, like this response. But going back to E then, why did we think it was right? Agreeing with the main conclusion of the rancher's argument? Oh, of course not. No, so the main conclusion of the rancher's argument is that the regulations would damage the economy. And the regulator is not saying it's damaging the economy. The regulator is saying it won't damage the economy because even though it might hurt ranchers, it will go to other businesses. So the economy will be fine. So it does not agree with the main conclusion of the rancher's argument, but construing it as grounds for optimism. Right. Yeah, this would mean that a damaged economy is grounds for optimism. And yeah, so I think we both got tricked by the same trick, actually. But yeah, reading it again and focusing on the word consequence instead of reading it as mitigating factor, I think that was what tripped us both up. Yeah. So we can look at their explanation really quickly, but I think it's going to be what I just said. Cool, awesome. We got our task from the question stem. How does the health regulator respond? Yeah, we're asked for the logical form. We're not asking for what the actual point is. So, we will paraphrase this as redefine good answers. So D and E are out because the regulator's not agreeing with the rancher. Yeah, he's not subtracting evidence from the situation. So A and B are out. So adding information to the situation through his redefinition. I don't really like this explanation, to be honest. I don't think that one makes as much sense as what we kind of just talked through. But anyway, moving on. You want to do more critical reasoning, or is there something else you'd want to do? Well, I'm going to start this question in the meantime. And let's go. Alrighty, I got another one. How'd you go? Oh, that worked out well. Yeah, nice. Um, that's actually pretty good. If I scroll up, I can hide what answer I actually chose. So if you're still working, it won't spoil it too much. Yeah, nice. Cool. I'll step through it really quick. So, I won't read the whole thing again. Long story short, the idea that these three species are actually just one has only been put into one analysis in the journal Science, and it's based on one specimen, skull 5. And that's the reason why it's not a strong argument, or what do they call it? The claim. The claim is tentative, as they put it. So one biologist predicts that a bunch of articles will come. But then the actual conclusion of this argument by the author is that even if a bunch of articles come, that won't help the claim that there are actually only one and not 3 of these species. So we need to find a reason why. Look, the reason it's tentative is the fact that it's one article in one specimen. So for these other articles to not help, it would have to be because of one of those factors. So, and the fact that it's a bunch of articles coming means it's going to be that it's still based on limited evidence. It's still based on this one specimen or very few specimens or something like that. So only fossils can lend support to this claim, not articles about fossils. Yeah, I don't really think that's true just in general, because an article about the fossils could be doing some cool new analysis or something. But yeah, so that doesn't really kind of complete this argument. Subsequent articles will expand upon and improve the argument presented in the original article in Science. That would actually be opposite to the conclusion. That would actually strengthen the strength of the claim as opposed to weakening it or keeping it weak. New articles will most likely construct new arguments based on fossils previously discovered. So that again would strengthen the claim and therefore weaken the argument excuse me, of the author. the new articles, like the original article, will most likely draw their conclusion from a single fossil record skull 5. That's like the perfect answer. It's like basically saying that the reason the claim was weak to begin with is it was all based on this one fossil. And so if all the rest of them are still just based on that one fossil, then it hasn't gotten any stronger. No articles prior to the original article give any credibility to the claim. Well, that's true before, it's going to be true after, so that doesn't help. That doesn't strengthen or weaken anything. So yeah, the articles will be worthless. That's what this person is looking for. Yeah, insubstantial articles will be written about it. That's a little less specific than actually what I had in my mind, but fair enough. Okay. So A contradicts the prompt, since if the claim about Skull 5 couldn't be supported by articles at all, then the status of the claim in question would be worse than tentative. Yeah, fair enough. Articles will improve the theory, yep. Articles might be useful, so those two are out, A through C are out. D might match, and E discusses earlier articles and is irrelevant, so that's why it's D, yep. Choice D would be better yet if it specified that the new articles would not analyze the skull in a substantially new way, or otherwise advance the analysis of the skull, but that detail is not required. I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Do you want to change to a different kind of question at all, or you want to keep doing some critical reasoning? So I can stick around for a bit longer and do a few more. Alright, we'll do one more critical reasoning question. And then I'll jump back on later tonight. Alright, question is on the screen. Let's go. Alright. Nice. Can I scroll up? Oh no, well you can still see my answer. Damn it. Didn't quite work that time. What if I put my mouse over it? No, that's not working. How'd you go with this one? Which of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? It's the first thing I read. So one of these answers, this argument relies on it without actually saying it. That's basically all that means. So I started reading it, and actually the truth is I kind of zoned out for about 25 seconds. I looked at the clock and it said 26 before I even really started reading. So that was not good. But anyway, disease X has afflicted cattle and cut into ranchers' profits. Okay, there's a disease cutting profits for ranchers. A genetic cause has been identified, as well as a therapy that can eradicate the cause. By applying this therapy to their cattle and eradicating the susceptibility to the disease, ranchers will be able to carry on business in the future without incidence of the disease in their cattle. So if they take this therapy, their cattle won't be affected by the disease. That's the conclusion. So I'm looking for anything that has to be true for that to be also true. Now, the gene therapy will not cause any defects in cattle. Well, that's not relevant because the conclusion has nothing to do with the side effects of the therapy. The conclusion is just that there will not be any incidences of that disease. So if there are side effects, but the disease is not there, the conclusion is still correct. And so that's not an assumption for that conclusion. So that was out. All cases of disease X are equally severe. Doesn't matter. Does not matter how severe the disease is. The only thing that matters is that there will be none of it if you take that therapy, or if you apply that therapy to your cows. So, irrelevant, also out. There are no treatments of disease X that are more effective than the gene therapy in question. Another one, even if there are other therapies or treatments, doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is whether or not this therapy would stop the cattle from getting the disease. So even if others could work too, or even if others could work better, doesn't matter, as long as this one works. So the conclusion is not relying on that either. And like you probably saw me just go cross, cross, cross really quickly. Yeah, exactly. That's the conclusion. Disease X won't occur if the gene therapy is applied. That's the only thing we care about. So, yeah, the first three ruled out really quick. There are no diseases other than disease X that currently threaten the cattle. That's the most irrelevant one so far. Has nothing to do with, it doesn't even have anything to do with disease X. So why would we care, let alone be an assumption that we're relying on? So I kind of already had an idea that E was going to be the answer, but I was nervous because if it looked bad as well, then I ruled out something that was probably right. But yeah, there are no precursors to or triggers of disease X, genetic or otherwise, other than the one targeted by the new gene therapy. That one does make sense because if there were other things that could also cause disease X, then solving this one with this therapy can't guarantee the cattle won't get that disease because they could get it a different way. And so that one is an assumption, but for this conclusion. And I need the clock. I'll just shuffle this guy over a little bit. Yeah, that'll do. All right, let's go. a roll since you joined. Although I think there was still the question that we both got wrong. But yeah, how? Yeah, okay, awesome. Let's talk through it. So this question is interesting because it's a bit different to the other ones that we looked at. Um, so this one is basically saying, like, how did the author make the argument? So they're not actually asking, like, I think every other question we've gone through so far has been talking about, making an argument stronger, making it weaker, like that kind of thing. Or what does it assume? So what's it like relying on to be strong? Um, so this question is specifically about the structure. So they don't actually care how good the argument is at all. All they want to know is how is it structured. And so that's why, like, if you look at my scratch work here, hopefully, I mean, my writing is really terrible, so sorry about that. But what I wrote, I'll step through it really quickly, was, and I'm only developing my technique for this sort of slowly as I go, but um, I looked at this and I thought, okay, well, once I realized it's asking for the development of the argument, and I kind of confirmed that by looking at the first option, like answer A is saying forming the hypothesis that best explains. Okay, it's talking about what is he doing, or what is this author doing. Um, so I went back and I thought, okay, which what type of thing is each sentence? Like what is each sentence doing? So the first sentence, um, and this is a really good example of this type of question because you don't have to understand it at all to be able to, like, you don't have to understand the topic like at all to be able to answer the structure. So nanotechnology may pose risks in the coming decades as we find it increasingly commonplace to introduce small robots into our bodies. So that's just talking about, okay, we're making small robots and then one day we might put them in our bodies. It doesn't actually matter. Uh, it's kind of saying, well, I wrote down it's a premise. It's kind of saying, well, that we're going to start putting robots in our bodies at some point in the future. And so that it's kind of making a claim that this could be risky, but really it's providing some evidence that that's going to be coming into our bodies. So I wrote down premise, even if you can't read that, sorry. In the passage, sorry, second sentence. So the second sentence, but the fact that these robots might be invisible to the naked eye doesn't mean we are helpless against them. And so, um, again, you don't even really have to understand what that's saying. If you read the word but, you can go, but something. So here's some point, but here's something against it. Yeah. So awesome. So here's some evidence. Whatever it says almost doesn't matter, but here's an argument against that first point. So I said it's a conclusion. Um, and then the third sentence, after all, since the blah 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 blah. It doesn't actually matter. Um, this is just more evidence, and it's evidence to support the argument we made in the second sentence. So that's why I wrote, okay, it's a premise, but it's supporting our argument from sentence 2. So, and like, but if you read it, you can kind of go, okay, since the initial development of germ theory, yeah, exactly, yeah, it is C. Nice, awesome. Um, since the initial development of germ theory, we've designed and continuously improved upon ways to protect ourselves from a variety of germs. So, um, basically, we've got a point made, and we've got a counterpoint, and then we've got evidence for the counterpoint. And so if we go through these answer choices, forming the hypothesis that best explains several apparently conflicting pieces of evidence. Well, this is not several pieces of conflicting evidence. It's more or less like I mean, I wrote premise, but you could kind of write, a conclusion here as well. And then this is like a counter conclusion. Again, sorry about my writing. So yeah, this is not a hypothesis that explains a bunch of conflicting evidence. Reinterpreting evidence that had been used to support an earlier theory. No, there's no supporting, there's no reinterpreting happening. It's just one piece of evidence, an argument, another piece of evidence. Using an analogy with a known phenomenon to draw a conclusion about an unknown phenomenon. So that one makes sense because we've got this thing of, okay, we might have robots in our bodies one day, but we'll be able to protect ourselves because if we can protect ourselves against germs, then surely we can protect ourselves against robots. I mean, if I was going to simplify the argument, that's what those three sentences say, right? But again, what it says is not actually that important. If we kind of go, okay, I mean, you kind of have to understand it a little bit to answer for this answer choice, but you'd have to say, okay, well, we're talking about robots, but we're not helpless because we can fight germs. You can kind of see it's making an analogy. Like, there's no direct connection between robots and germs. Like, say, like you said, right? How are robots and germs connected? Well, they're not. That's the analogy. It's saying, well, we know something about germs. We don't know about dealing with robots yet. But if we can deal with germs, we can probably deal with robots. So that one was still in, and that's why I underlined it to say it's still in. D, speculating about how characteristics of small robots in the future might develop from characteristics of germs. So there was nothing that I saw there saying that robots are going to end up being like germs. This is kind of saying that if we know something about germs, then robots will follow the same thing, and that's not really, had nothing to do with what this said, so that one's out, so I crossed it. And E, pointing out differences between natural and human-made microscopic threats. It actually didn't point out any differences at all. If anything, it said they might be more similar than it might be similar, so yeah. So C was the only answer that was left. And here's the thing, like, I know I said a few times, like, you don't have to understand it, actually. Let's just say I had no idea at all about robots and germs, and I didn't understand that point at all. If I knew that there was like a claim happening, and then the second sentence is some conclusion against it, and then the third sentence is like some evidence to support our conclusion, we can rule out A because it's not explaining different pieces of evidence. We can rule out B because it's not reinterpreting evidence, it's providing like separate evidence. We don't understand C, using an analogy with a known phenomenon, like I don't know what that means. We don't understand it. So we can't rule it out, but we don't understand it, so we leave it for now. D, speculating about how characteristics of robots might develop from characteristics of germs. Well, we know that there was a point and like a counterpoint. So that's not speculating about building on the original point. So we can rule that one out too. And then E, pointing out differences between natural and human-made microscopic threats. Yeah, like it's not really pointing out differences either. It's kind of saying like, here are some similarities and that's why. So again, you don't even have to understand it really to rule out A, B, D, and E. So you could get to the right answer even without understanding it. So let's just see what they said for their explanation. How the author develops the argument. Worth a glance at the answer choices to determine their format. I actually did that without even kind of realizing, so that's cool. The answer choices are somewhat generalized descriptions of how the author formed their argument. We can create a filter with the opinion in the prompt. So the conclusion of the argument doesn't really appear until the second sentence, which is what I sort of drew. With the opinion doesn't mean we are helpless against them. The development of the argument is simply the final sentence. This is a comparison with germ theory. We'd call it either a comparison or an example, and we'll look for a comparison or example in the answer choices. So yeah, okay, that makes sense. Since germ theory, we've designed stuff, so you can say it's comparing it. Yeah, okay. Looking at the first couple of words of each answer choice, we're left with C. You can just rule out the rest based on the fact that none of them are doing a comparison. And an analogy is a comparison. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, nice. All right, let's say we'll do one more for now, eh? And how's that sound? Okay, let's go. Oh no. Well, I apparently got this one wrong. Let me know when you're done. I'll start going through it. All right, I'm gonna start. So, what do we got here? The percentage of global tourists who visit Kakua has increased by 5% over the past 3 years. I mean, that's a bit redundant already. The percentage increased by 5%. Okay. Cool. That's not the answer that they think, but we'll figure it out. I got it wrong as well. I said D. So let's work it out. So the percentage of tourists has increased to this country has increased by 5% over the last 3 years. And tourism contributes an estimated 7% of their GDP. Therefore, this increase is likely to have a positive impact on the economy. So the conclusion is that because they have had an increase in tourism, it will help their economy because it's a significant part of their GDP. So we're looking for something that supports the idea that that it's going to be coming from that the tourists coming will help the economy. So A, let's look at it. People who visit international destinations travel a much greater distance to their destination on average currently than such people did 3 years ago. So I ruled this out. You can see on my scratch pad, I ruled it out based on basically how far they travel doesn't really make a difference to whether or not it helps the economy. Like if they come from the country next door, or they come from a 20-hour flight away, if they bring the same amount of money, they bring the same amount of money. So I think the distance they're traveling doesn't really matter. So I think it's irrelevant. So I ruled it out. B, people are more likely to visit Kikua's neighbor countries for pleasure now than they were 3 years ago. Yep, I agree. B is incorrect. That would actually be weakening this argument. It's saying that yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, so B is weakening the argument. If they're going somewhere else, they're not going to Kikua. C, the number of people who travel internationally for pleasure has increased slightly over the past 3 years. Now they think this is the answer. And I ruled it out. The reason I ruled it out was the conclusion wasn't that the conclusion wasn't about whether or not the number of people traveling for pleasure has increased. At the end of the day, we know that for a fact already. The percentage of global tourists who visit Kikua has increased, right? So we already knew that global tourists going to this country has increased. So whether or not they're doing it for pleasure doesn't really matter, I don't think. So the conclusion was that people coming will spend more money. Like we'll keep spending money in Kikua because they're such a big part of the GDP. So I didn't think this strengthened the argument at all because the argument wasn't about why they were traveling. Unless they're saying that people traveling for business and a business tourist is still considered a global tourist. And if they're saying that people traveling for business don't spend so much, I don't know. That seems like a weird point to be made, to be honest. I said D. So the percentage of people who choose to revisit an international tourist destination within a year of a given prior visit has increased dramatically in the last 2 years. So I thought that does strengthen the argument because if tourist visiting is a significant part, because tourism is a significant part of their GDP, then if we have evidence that the fact that they have visited last year is a high indication that they're going to visit again this year, then that being a big part of their GDP will have a positive impact on the economy. So I feel like that does strengthen the point. So I'm not sure why they ruled it out, so I'll see what they say in a second. And then E, Kikua is the leading international tourist destination in its region. Yeah, if the point is tourists come and that helps the economy, comparing them to any other country doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter if they're bigger or smaller than the country next door in terms of how popular they are or the leading international destination. As long as the people are bringing money and spending it, who cares how other countries are doing? So other countries are irrelevant. So the fact that they're leading is irrelevant. So that's why I ruled out E. So I think we can at least rule out A, B, and E relatively comfortably. So let's just see what they say about C and D, because that's what I'm curious about. Cool. Reading the question. It asks us to strengthen, so we will at first attack. There are a number of points we can attack, but reasoning... Oh, okay, so they're saying if you're trying to strengthen it, then first you're going to figure out how to weaken it, because that'll tell you what strengthens it. There are a number of points we can attack, but reasoning involving percentages tends to be erroneous, so we will focus there. we can filter for not confusing numbers and percentages as a strengthener. Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't really even think about percentages and numbers, to be honest. Um, oh, I made the exact mistake that they just said. The percentage of global tourists who visit Kakua. So everything I just said about like Kakua is the leading international tourist destination in its region, everything I said about that, like we don't care how it compares to countries nearby, that's in this sentence. Percentage of global tourists. So people traveling anywhere in the world, the percentage of them that chose Kakua has increased. So that's exactly what I said about E. Um, we don't actually really care if Kakua is getting a high percentage or a low percentage. What we care about is how many people are actually there. Um, and that's why C is different from what was in the first sentence. C is different because it's saying the number of people who travel internationally has increased. So you put this together with this, and now we have more people traveling and more of them coming to Kakua. So that means just more people in general coming to Kakua. So that's why C is a strengthener. That makes way more sense. Yeah, exactly. Kakua might have gone up to 90% of all travel because there was a global pandemic and no one was allowing anyone to travel anywhere except Kakua is the only country that's open. So they got 90% of all travel, but there was no travel. So that doesn't help their economy at all. That actually would have been a really good example to think about. Um, but I completely missed the fact that it's the percentage of tourists generally. I read this as one block, the percentage of global tourists who visit Kakua. Um, yeah, and actually, to be honest, the sentence is a little bit ambiguous. Now that I'm reading it again, I think the way I first read it is still okay. No, I take it back. The word global. Global is the difference. If this said percentage of tourists who visit Kakua, then that's all one block. It's tourists who visit Kakua. Um, but global tourists, that's already, I guess, its own thing. Tourists anywhere in the globe. A percentage of them who visit Kakua. So I think that's probably how they kind of trapped us. And so if we go back to this explanation, that's what they're warning us. They're saying when uh, whenever there's reasoning involving percentages, it can be a bit uh, confusing. So we're going to look for something that does not confuse numbers and percentages. All right, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. A, B, and E all fail to clarify the distinction between absolute number and percentage, so they fail to pass our filter. C and D are close to the filter. Well, at least C and D were still the options they reduced it to, which is good. That's what we cut it down to. We can evaluate choice C by the negation test. What if the number of international travelers had not increased? What if it had plummeted, like in a global pandemic? Then in fact it's not accounted for by the prompt, and it would crush the argument. Yep, exactly. The percentage of the pie who visit Kakua is larger, but the pie is much smaller. So the actual number of visitors to Kakua could have decreased, and then that rules out a positive outcome for the economy. Yeah, okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Um, by ruling out that possibility, the non-negated C fixes a major flaw in the argument, is therefore a strengthener. Choice D, which we liked at first, is still vulnerable to C as the whole, as is the argument as a whole. Yeah, cool. All right, let's do some. Let's do like one or two data sufficiency questions. reset my clock. Now you remember that data sufficiency is not my strong suit compared to verbal at least. So we'll see how we go. I might be needing your help. All right. I haven't looked at the question yet. And let's go. Yay. Nice. Sorry, I didn't see. Were you finished ages ago and just waiting for me? Sorry. Um, but yeah, I took a little bit longer because I just wanted to double check, but I obviously don't need to explain this one to you, I think. But just in case anyone watches this video back, I'll run through my logic really quickly. So, two people get a bonus. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, if I can answer it, it's probably easy. Yeah, two people get a bonus. What is the actual amount of their bonuses? So I wrote on my scratch pad amount of bonus. That's the question. I probably didn't need to write that down, to be honest, because it is very simple. But anyway, just in case I don't want to get confused with percentages or something like that, like I just did in the reasoning question, the verbal question. But anyway, statement one. The bonus was 50% greater than Fernanda. Doesn't help us at all. We don't know what the numbers are. Easy to rule that one out. One is not sufficient. Two, the sum is between these two numbers. Well, by definition, then there's multiple options. So it can't be like, yeah, that doesn't tell us enough. So that's out as well. So now if we put them together, um, I was still tempted to immediately rule it out and just say, well, we still only have a range. So of course we can't have one answer. But then I wrote down this just to like confirm, well, what if there's only one option that actually fits that description of E being 1.5F? But then, so basically I was just, okay, if I can think of two options, then I'll say it's insufficient. So I ended up working out, well, um, if one was 900 and the other one, um, sorry, that wouldn't work. Yeah, if one was like 1500 and then the other one was, nope, that doesn't work either. Hang on. I can't remember what numbers I used, but I should have written them down. But either way, I came up with two options. Um, let's see, would it be like, yeah, 1000 and 1500? Yeah, perfect. Oh, and that was definitely one of them. This is an easy one. Because I think I went 1000, 1500, and then like something like, yeah, 900, 1350. Yeah, exactly. Um, I did something like that. Jeez, I must be burned out. I can't even remember which numbers I chose like 2 minutes ago. We don't need to read all of that. I think that makes sense. I mean, doing it with algebra. So when we combine the statements, I got to this. I wrote down E equals 1.5F. 2100 is less than E plus F, which is less than 2800. Oh yeah, okay. 2100 is less than 2.5F, less than 2800. Yeah, yeah, I agree. No need to do it. Because even if the number was a fraction, like a decimal, you'd figure out a way to make it work. So there's no need to do that. I totally agree. This would probably be a waste of time in the exam because it already took me 1:40. If I tried to do algebra, it would have taken me 3 minutes. Yeah, and that's true. I mean, I like to write down if I'm ruling out a statement or not, just in case I confuse myself and I have to look back and go, oh, did I already rule this out as sufficient by itself, like or not? So I like to do this just to make sure that I don't forget if I rule it out. But otherwise, yeah, I agree. I don't think you need to write much. That's true. All right, let's do one more data sufficiency, and then I think I'm gonna have to take a break, have some lunch. Yeah, nice, nice. Thanks. All right, I will restart my clock. Let's go. Hmm. Don't know why it's doing that. Hmm. Come on. What's the name? Tell me I got it. No. Damn. Yeah, you got it. uh, yeah. So I thought frame the equation. So I mean, basically, what I kind of tried to like, where my logic was, yeah, okay. Let's assume that the amount invested at X% is A. Yep. So A. I'm just going to change the color. 10,000 minus A. Yeah, right. I've seen this kind of logic before. That makes sense. And so if we know that AX percent plus 10K minus A Y percent equals 285, we still have two variables. Yeah. Right. I guess we don't need the percent signs. Right. Yep. Yep. So this is what we know from just the question prompt. And so what I kind of thought was, well, if we know how much we ended up with, I thought that both statements gave us essentially the ratio, like 11x equals 12y, so it's 11 to 12. Right. So that's like statement one gives us that. Oh, right. Right. It gives us the relationship between the percentages, but not how much went to each one. Right. Okay. The ratio of the amount interest earned at the rate of X per year to the amount of interest earned at the rate Y per year was 8 to 11. Right. Right. Because if we know that the amount earned from X to Y is whatever that is, that'll let us figure out how much was invested to get to that amount. Right. 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 So statement one gives us X versus Y. Statement two gives us A. Yep, awesome. Right, that makes sense. You put them together and you get the answer. I didn't read it properly. I thought that one and two were giving us the same information, but the amount earned is not the same as the actual percentages themselves. So, right. That's a good thing for me to learn. I'll try to make sure I keep that in mind if I'm trying to work out something like this with split percentage increases. This part, especially the 10,000 minus A, that's like an important sort of step that didn't even come to my mind. All right, well, I can't finish on that one. I have to do one more. So let's see, is that essentially the same equation? I think it is. All right, let's have a look. And I mean, I was at a minute 42. Could have taken a little bit longer to get my head around that last one. Anyway, here we go. Let's go. Oh, come on. Yeah, I am clearly weak in quant. Ay, ay, ay. Okay. I think I can kind of see where I might have gone wrong though. Like if I think like the equations I wrote were fine in terms of what statement 1 and 2 gave us. It was not 19. Oh, Jesus. Sorry, yeah. Good catch. That would have been a problem. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't have mattered if I said 9 or 19 because it's data sufficiency. But if this was problem solving, that would have been a big problem. Yeah. Um, yeah, so 15R plus 9B equals 732. But I figured then that, oh, we do have two equations. Right. 15R, 9B equals 732. That's essentially the same equation. Oh, of course it is. Right. Just divide by 3. 732 divided by 3 equals this. Right. Yeah, of course. Of course. Oh, that's obvious. That's so obvious. Um, I didn't even think to look at the fact that they're in the same ratio. So it's the same equation. I didn't even, like, I probably didn't need to write them down. As soon as if I looked at this and I said, okay, 15 red, 9 blue, 5 red, 3 blue, that's the same equation. So I can just divide this by 3. That's going to be the answer. Yes. That's obvious. I should have been really obvious. Oh man, that's so bad. All right, I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna get one right. Ay, ay, ay. All right, last one though. Even if I get this one wrong as well, it's the last one for now. Okay, let's go. Hmm. Bloody hell. My notes are terrible. Oh no. I'm so bad at this. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right. So my logic for not thinking it was sufficient alone was I wrote down what I thought was the formula. Um, so like the total that Pat earns is 100 plus 10% of the earnings minus 1,000. So I think that's fine as a formula. And then statement one, and so we want to know what is T. Statement one says total amount Pat saved last week was equal to 10% of the amount she earned last week. So, uh, I didn't even think about this logically. Yeah. For last week, T equals 0.1 of E, right? Which means um, that, yeah, I can use those two formulas together. And say 0.1 of E equals 100 plus 0.1 of E minus 1,000, and I can solve for E. Yep, one variable, one equation. Yeah. I should have written this down. I should have written this down as a formula, because if I did that, it would have been clearer. I just thought I could rule it out logically, and my logic was wrong. So of course I can't. Um, so the lesson is, especially if it's something like that, I can write the formula, and that'll make it clear in my mind. Yeah, and then statement two, Pat's earnings last week total 2,000. And so again, if I can plug in E, I wrote down the formula, and all I needed to do was put in the one variable to equal T. Wow. I framed the equation correctly, but I didn't do it for the answer choices. I didn't even really consider the answer choices properly. I mean, it's really obvious now what I got wrong, like what I didn't do properly. That's really obvious. And I think both of the times it's just coming down to not thinking about it properly. I need to take a little bit more time to get my head around it. And if I wrote down the formula for statement one, then I think it's obvious. I can go, okay, well, 0.1 equals E. Can I substitute this in? I just need to ask that question. Can I sub this in? If I can put 0.1 E in for T here, then solve for E. Cool, sufficient. That is literally E. Can I put E in? Like, that is, I can't. Statement two, saying that one is insufficient is like genuinely embarrassing. Oh my god. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna say it's because I'm rusty. I've been looking at verbal too much lately. I need to get back and do more. I need to get back and do more quant and get my kind of, what do you call it, number sense going again. Statement two is just so obvious. Oh my god. I genuinely don't know how I did that with statement two. I have no idea how that just happened. But it just came down to like, yeah, I'm still rushing. Even though it took me over 2 minutes, I was still rushing. And I think I need to be taking a step back, letting myself take a little bit longer for now, while I'm making sure that I have all the concepts really solid. Because like everything there I knew, I just didn't think about it. So I need to take the time to make sure I have the concept solid, and then get faster once I've actually got it solid. I can't get faster before I know it, or before I can reliably do it. So I think that's what went wrong for me there. Anyway, I know that those ones were probably really easy for you. That's not so it's not that helpful, but
Hopefully explaining it to me is useful at least in some way. It's helpful for me, so thank you. But this has been really good. I think this has been really good. Like, yeah, it's good to be able to kind of talk through. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for joining. It's been really good. It's good to be able to kind of talk through some logic and actually see if it makes sense. Um, like when we were going through critical reasoning, um, even if I got a question wrong, like the fact that we could talk about it and go, okay, now that makes sense. That's that's really helpful. And then yeah, essentially you just became my maths teacher, so thanks for that too. But yeah, let's like definitely do it again soon. Um, Let me know. Shoot me a message on here or something like that. Whenever timing works for you, and anyone watching this as well, if like the same way, shoot me a message on here and let me know if timing works for you, and I can do my best to try to accommodate my schedule. I've got my schedule up there now because I thought it could be useful for, it could be a good timing for people, and I know that more or less I'm going to be home at 10 o'clock every night. Um, so if I miss it, it's probably just because I was too tired from work and fell asleep. But otherwise, I can try and make other times work as well. Just so let me know.